EU ministers have been debating the bloc's approach to U.S. President Trump's plan to impose 30% tariffs on European goods. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has insisted the EU still wants to reach an accord before the August 1st deadline. On Sunday, the EU delayed retaliation over separate U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum as a sign of goodwill. If negotiations fail, however, the EU has prepared a list of counter-tariffs worth 21 billion euros on U.S. goods. Well, for more on this, we can talk now to Matthew P. Goodman. He's the director for Geoeconomics at the Council on Foreign Relations, a Washington-based think tank. Thanks for being with us. Matthew, if the European Union were to ask you for advice in this situation, what would you say? Hit back at the tariffs with tough countermeasures or try to appease Donald Trump?
Well, they're in a very difficult position because any path you take is full of uncertainty. I think it's reasonable for President von der Leyen to signal that she still wants to get a deal before August 1st and is withholding the fire, the EU's fire for now on retaliation. But, at some point, if this breaks down, which, frankly, is very possible because it's very hard to know what Donald Trump really wants and that would satisfy him by August 1st, let alone even beyond that. So I think, you have to keep the retaliation card in your, up your sleeve as well.
What does this look like from an American perspective? What could these tariffs mean for U.S. consumers and the American economy?
Well, I'm not a very good economist, but if you pass, if you put tariffs on things that come into the country, eventually those are going to be passed on to consumers. That just seems unavoidable. I think the reason that you haven't seen price increases in the U.S. that have been expected is that I think a lot of importers have been withholding that pass through to consumers while they see whether these tariffs are actually going to be imposed, and trying to sort of swallow some of the tariff costs now. But eventually, they're going to need to pass on those costs. And I think, you'll see it in higher inflation. There have been predictions as much as, a percentage point of additional price increases by the end of the year if these go through. So I think, and by the way, the other effect is it'll probably slow growth as well, including because exports are going to be subject to some retaliation. And so you'll have a lot of eventual economic effects, but it isn't kicking in yet. That is surprising some people, but I think it's going to happen.
So could these tariffs at some point end up backfiring from an American perspective? Because Donald Trump is telling the American people that this is going to revive manufacturing in America and mean more jobs and prosperity.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, first of all, it's not clear exactly what Donald Trump really wants. He's signaled 4 or 5 different objectives for these tariffs, including, as you say, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. Some of that is happening and probably will continue, but whether we will be back to being the kind of manufacturing power that he wanted, that he saw back in the 1950s or something, seems unlikely for a variety of reasons. And even if that works, it's going to run at contrary to one of his other, or a couple of his other objectives, including bringing revenue into the U.S. Treasury, because obviously the fewer imports we have, the less revenue there's going to be. So even if this works, it's going to counter some other objectives of these tariffs. So or if deals are struck as well, same effect. You'll see imports declining in theory, and that'll reduce revenue. So I think that there are a lot of contrary things happening here. Certainly, if the effects of the tariffs get passed on to consumers, including his MAGA base, then I think there's going to be a lot of unhappiness, and yes, there could be some sort of backfire effect here.
Matthew, thanks for taking time to talk with us today. That was Matthew P. Goodman from the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.